Welcome back to Market on Close. I'm Marley Caden. To discuss the impact of tariffs on the economy, joining us now is Ambassador Kristen Silverberg, the president and COO of Business Roundtable. Ambassador Silverberg, thank you for being with us this afternoon. I guess just to start things off, let's just dive right into tariffs and the impacts that we're already seeing on businesses.
Yeah, we have 240 members, so CEOs of large U.S. companies, and we're seeing a real fragmentation among the sectors. We have some companies that are not particularly trade exposed, who are exposed to some of the AI investment boom, and they're having really stellar quarters. We have some companies that are trade exposed, but who have managed to navigate the tariff situation pretty well with supply chain adjustments or some pricing strategies. But we have a set of members, particularly in manufacturing, who are facing some real headwinds from rising input costs. They're having challenges with some of their overseas export markets because it's hard for them to stay price competitive. And we're starting to see those companies really take a hit in terms of their ability to invest and grow and employ people. I think it's important to keep in mind it's still very early in the tariff implementation process. The observed effective tariff rate now is about 10%. That's up from 2.5% at the beginning of the year. But once the tariffs are fully implemented and once companies have moved through their inventories, the effective tariff rate will be about 20%, so significantly higher than where we are today. And we don't know exactly how that will play out, but we would expect it to have an impact on profitability, on company costs, and ultimately on consumers.
And certainly, the uncertainty has been a conversation that we're constantly having as we're sort of still in this framework phase of tariff implementation. Now, you just mentioned the manufacturing sector. What other areas are most at risk due to tariffs, particularly during this time of uncertainty where they aren't fully realized yet?
Well, it's both the uncertainty about tariffs, so the fact that we're in the process of negotiating deals with countries. It's also the complexity of tariffs. We went from a system where most products, for most products, companies paid the MFN, most favored nation rate, other than products for which they paid zero tariff because there was an existing free trade agreement. We now have a very complex process where there are a bunch of different tariffs depending on the country, depending on the product. And in some cases, the company has to look beneath the product to the actual components to figure out what the tariff is. And of course, we don't know because of the negotiations. Companies don't know if those tariff rates are going to stick or if they're going to evolve. That's challenging for large companies like the ones that joined Business Roundtable, but it's particularly challenging for small business. And so I think I point to that as one of the other big things we're watching in terms of impacts on the economy is how smaller businesses navigate this complex and less stable environment.
And what are your thoughts on how the tariffs have been implemented so far with, some of these pauses? And it feels almost as if we're at a traffic light sometimes. Green means go, yellow, we're paused, red, we're stopping now. And it just feels as though it's constantly moving.
I think that's right. And we're really encouraging the administration and our closest trading partners to get to place, keep negotiating some of these deals, get the tariff rates down to a more manageable level, and stabilize the system so that companies can make investment and hiring decisions around a more predictable set of tariffs. We survey our members 4 times a year based on, to ask them what are their plans for investment and hiring, what are their expectations for sales. And what we've seen is a lot of volatility in that. In June, the last time we did the survey, we saw our members predicting a lower growth environment, particularly, constrained CapEx and hiring. And in part of that was the cost from tariff. Part of it was the unpredictability of tariffs. And so we're really encouraging the administration keep negotiating these deals, get tariffs down to a more manageable level. And they've gotten some really concrete concessions from other countries in terms of market access and their lower tariff rates. So we'd like to see them keep negotiating these deals and try to get the tariff environment in a more stable setting.
And Ambassador, I mean, you have a literal seat at the table with some of the most powerful CEOs in this country. How are you going about doing that with trying to speak to the administration about trying to get these rates more manageable? And what does an ideal outcome look like?
Well, the administration, to its credit, is open to hearing from business. I mean, I think the president wants a strong and growing economy, and lots of our CEOs have been on the phone with him, have been in conversations with Secretary Letnick, Secretary Bessent, other members of the administration. And I think that advocacy has made, in some cases, has made a real difference. I think that the initial truce in May with China that brought some of the tariff rates down, I think that was in part because of advocacy from business who said, hey, we're facing some real supply shock issues. We'd like to see those moderated. A lot of our CEOs have emphasized the importance of the Mexico and Canada relationship. And I think some of the provisions the administration made in terms of exempting USA compliant goods from the tariffs is in part in response to a lot of advocacy from business. So, we're going in, we're spending time with them to talk about, first, here are the implications of tariffs, and two, here are some really important things you can get in these trade negotiations that would make it easier for US companies to export and do business around the world. And we've seen them produce some real, some very concrete benefits in the negotiations with Japan and the EU and the UK and others.
And with those implications that you're discussing, how do you view the long-term impact on the economy as the whole and also on the supply chain?
I think, as I said, I think these are very early days on tariffs. If this plays out as expected, if we see the current set of tariffs fully implemented, we're going to see additional tariffs put in place on specific products. That's semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, and and we just saw some announcements on expanded derivatives around steel and aluminum. So if we see all those implemented, we're going to have very high, historically very high average tariff weights. And I think that'll have a drag on the economy. I mean, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but we would expect certainly, higher costs on companies that either result in real cost reduction in other places, maybe lower investment, maybe reduced hiring, or they get passed on to consumers. And of course, that could show up in, there's a healthy debate underway about whether that's a persistent inflationary impact or whether it's a one-off price increase. But either way, we could see some real impacts for consumers.
Yes, only time will tell on that one. But we so appreciate you taking the time to be with us this afternoon to talk tariffs and their potential impacts. That's Ambassador Kristen Silverberg, the president and COO of Business Roundtable.